In Oakland, California, mourning continues over the death of at least 36 people who were killed in a fire at the Ghost Ship Warehouse 1 week ago. The fire is one of the deadliest building fires in the last half-century in the United States. The Ghost Ship was an artist collective that housed many young artists and musicians, and the victims were overwhelmingly young artists, activists, and community organizers. This is Oakland resident Amir.
Obviously, I'm sad. I knew two people in the fire named Alex and Anna. Obviously I'm sad, but I'm more concerned about their family and their well-being. More than that, I've lost two friends.
The Ghost Ship Warehouse was reportedly rife with fire hazards. Its landlord had a history of owning properties with building violations. Many local Oakland artists and tenants' rights activists say the fire is a symptom of a failed urban housing policy where rising rents have forced people to live and make art in sometimes hazardous spaces. In the wake of the fire, Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf has pledged $1.7 million to create and sustain affordable, safe spaces for local artists and arts organizations. For more, we go directly to Oakland, California, where we're joined by Neha Bhat, a Bay Area DJ, record label owner who survived the Ghost Ship Warehouse fire. 7 of his friends died that night. Neha, welcome to Democracy Now! Our deepest condolences for your loss. Can you describe what happened that night?
Sure. Thank you very much, Amy, for having me on. The night of the fire, which was this last Friday, I can't believe it's only been a week. It feels like a lifetime. I was going to the event and going to the event to support a number of friends that were performing that night, I actually got out of a car, walked over to the building where the event was happening. I was out front. I saw a couple of my friends, and I started chatting with them. There was, it was 2 friends in particular. One of them went inside midway through our conversation. A couple minutes later, he never came out of the building. The other friend that I was chatting with, we hung back, chatted for a little bit. And then suddenly we heard the word fire. We, looked over, and in horror, people started pouring out. We couldn't believe what we heard. We immediately thought, what can we do? And we were sort of still, we were about to enter the building, and we wanted to know what we could do. Before we could even formulate our thoughts on that question, the entire building filled up with just plumes of smoke starting to waft out of the building, and we realized there was no way we could enter. We had no idea what was going on. We waited outside of the building for hours, realizing that no one was coming out. We spent a lot of time just, I just imagine was just dreaming of our friends emerging, in some way, something happening. But the fact is, the building it was not possible to enter the building very quickly. This entire incident happened so much more quickly than anyone could have imagined. I don't think any of us, could have imagined a fire taking and completely consuming a building as quickly as it did. And really, the smoke is something that none of us could have anticipated. It would have been that deadly that quickly. We watched it happen and waited outside, realizing that a lot of people we knew, in my case, 7 people I knew well, people that were really important to me, were inside, and important to me for a lot of different reasons. We waited and waited to see if there was something we didn't know. But the simple truth was that they were never coming out.
Neha, can you describe the Ghost Ship, what this space represents for the community, for artists?
Sure. The Ghost Ship is just one of the few places left where the community could, for my community, it was one of the few, which is a sort of underground techno and house and experimental electronic music scene. It was one of the few places that was open to us to do events, that had a long timeline and that could go very late into the night. It was a community. It was a space where we could go outside of the typical bar and club scene. That type of event sort of often takes place in, which is really important because in bars and clubs, the imperative is to sell alcohol and that's whether there are good people working in a bar or a club or not. The reality is, what you have to do is sell as many drinks as possible, and that creates a certain dynamic around a space. It means that the people that are able to shape events at that space are the people with the biggest pockets. And at a space like the Ghost Ship, and
why
other
they
spaces,
call it the Ghost Ship?
I'm not entirely sure where that name came from. One thing about the space is that it was a space that our community rented for events. We weren't, most of the people that lived there weren't really involved in the organization of that event. But there was some art that was sort of that sort of was reminiscent of that feel. There was a large ship at one point suspended in the space, and I think that was part of the aesthetic.
Several residents and friends say the fire highlighted the long-standing issue of the lack of affordable properties in the Bay Area. This is Berkeley Mayor Jesse Aragon.
Really, this is a symptom of the broader housing gentrification crisis that's affecting the entire Bay Area, where artists are being pushed out of cities and pushed into, oftentimes, dangerous situations. And we need to do more to create more affordable and safe space for artists to live and work in our community.
Neha Bhat, your response?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. What we've seen, in Oakland in general, the Bay Area, there have been, thousands of evictions a year. The escalation, the scale of the housing crisis is something that, is well known worldwide in the Bay Area, and that, what has become, epidemic in San Francisco has bled into Oakland in a really dramatic way. That's something that affects, all kinds of people within the artist community, and within in the case of sort of work-live spaces for artists, you see this very dramatically. There are so many spaces that have been evicted and evicted in the last few years. The Lobot Gallery in Oakland, 1919 Market Street in Oakland are just two of the spaces that were lost in recent times. It's just one symptom of it, but it has an effect on all kinds of things. In this case, it drove people into a space that I think had was a compromise. I think a lot of people were conscious that it was not the safest place because of some specific factors about it. Nobody understood the scale of how unsafe it would end up being. I don't think anyone could really have predicted how bad this tragedy would be. But it is the case that sort of the reason why people were driven to both live and then throw events at the space, and the majority of people who perished didn't live there. They were just attending an event there. The majority of people, and the reason why this space became central was because of the dwindling effect and the lack of alternatives.
Neha, Mayor Libby Schaaf has pledged $1.7 million to create and sustain so-called affordable, safe spaces for artists. Is this enough? She was shouted down at a vigil for warehouse fire victims. What do you think she should be doing?
I think that is not nearly enough. First of all, this initiative is one that was already in the works before the fire. It's not a response to the fire, but it's been announced since then, as part of Libby Schaaf's attempt at claiming that there is no witch hunt or overreaction to the fire. But the reality is, right now, multiple warehouse spaces have already been served eviction notice within Oakland. Right now, in the last couple of days since the fire, many others have been served inspection notices. Inspection notices, 1919 Market, it was an inspection notice that led to their eviction. And the reality is there needs to be much greater action, much more swift action. There's, right now what we really need is, a moratorium on evictions, a moratorium on red tagging of buildings, things that will affect all of the people being evicted, because what's happened after this disaster has been, I think, another example of disaster capitalism, a situation where, landlords, developers, and other people that actually can profit quite a bit from closing up and rebooting these spaces are jumping on this and taking advantage of it to colonize even more space within the East Bay. And I think that that dynamic is unfolding immediately, and it requires immediate action. Sort of this promised budget in the future is not enough. Furthermore, there needs to be funding for not just live workspaces, which is an extremely essential piece of this, but also venues for this specific type of art. Late night, the late night dance music that was played there needs a space to unfold, to actually, realize its own purpose, which is to actually have these long late night events.
Neha Bhat, who owns the building?
The building itself is owned by some absentee landlords. Their names escape me right now, but the building was administered in large part by the master tenant at the time. So.
And on Wednesday, Oakland's alternative weekly, the East Bay Express, published an article which fire department whistleblowers blamed the tragedy on a poorly managed fire department. The article reads, several Oakland Fire Department employees looked up warehouse's fire code inspection history, but when they attempted to pull records for 1315 31st Avenue from their own Fire Prevention Bureau's files, they discovered nothing. It's not even in the system, one firefighter said. He asked not to be identified for fear of retaliation from the city for speaking out. He and other firefighters went on to say the department's building inspection program is, quote, dangerously understaffed and disorganized. Again, that from the Oakland East Bay Express.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that the priorities of the city, have not been with safety, have not been with fire safety. And you see, there were only 6 building inspectors in Oakland. They hadn't been inside of this building for years and years and years. And I think, that mismanagement and that negligence, there's been a lot of talk about that, sort of trying to shift blame to the renters or the organizers of this event for this incident. But the reality is there is, not only is the Oakland Fire Department very, very understaffed and under-resourced and mismanaged, it seems, too, but also there is a tremendous incentive within the city to not report the space that you work. And the reality is the people with the biggest interest in defending ourselves and protecting ourselves from further tragedy, of making these safe spaces, are the people who live in these spaces, the people who throw events in these spaces, the people who attend these spaces. But right now, if you report a space, you might be homeless, you might be out of a space to have special events. So until there's a clear and non-punitive path to people coming into compliance, to people being able to throw events, in the way that they want to and need to, there will I think people will continue to operate in secrecy like this. So it's a double, it's part of a larger systemic problem.
I wanted to ask you about the transgender people who died in the fire, including Cash Askew from the band Them or Us Too. A number of transgendered people dying in the fire. Since then, multiple media outlets have misgendered them, adding to the grief of the community. Can you talk about this, Neha?
Yeah, I think it's Cash Askew is somebody who struggled a lot within the music scene to be treated equally and to be recognized the way that she wanted to be, and the misgendering of her and Feral Pines and anyone else, any other transgender victims or people associated with this just adds further insult to what has already been a horrible tragedy. These people struggled their whole lives for recognition, to be understood as their true selves, and it's it's the least that we can ask that when paying respect to them, that the media recognizes them in the way that they want it to be recognized in their lives. And furthermore, I think it's important to say that one of the reasons why there were so many transgender people at this event, as well as other queer attendees and people of color who were victims of this fire, is because of the type of opportunity a space like this presents. In the mainstream sort of club environment, bar environment, where alcohol reigns supreme, where there's a different kind of environment. Often, I think people, marginalized communities can face harassment. It doesn't feel like a safe space for them for a completely different set of reasons. And so, in a space like this, communities can self-organize and essentially be part of it in a different way, being included. And within Oakland, there is a very strong scene of queer, transgender artists, especially experimental artists within the electronic music scene in particular, and as well as Black and brown artists that are, I think that are a really important key part of the city's scene.
Neha, I just wanted to say that we've heard of a number of spaces from Baltimore to Nashville to other cities being closed down, and we just got this email from a listener who wrote, quote, "Here in Denver, our beloved artist spaces Rhinoceropolis and Glob were shut down last night by authorities. They'd been hosting events for independent experimental artists for over 10 years. They passed their annual inspection and were up to code with the city and their landlord," the email said. It went on to say the community was in mourning. Now many are without a home and without the spaces they pour their hearts and souls into. These are spaces radically tolerant for self-expression. We're all very sad, unquote. As we wrap up, Nihar, your thoughts about safe and unsafe spaces and what to do.
Yeah, I think what we see right now is that what we see right now is that across the country, like you said, Amy, landlords are either out of fear or, out of the opportunity that this presents for them, shutting down spaces, and, the city in many cases are collaborating with them. But I think that this will only make the problem worse. By punishing these spaces, we are creating conditions for people to live in even more dangerous places, as well as throw events at even more dangerous spaces. The city needs to fund and protect people that are right now under attack from eviction, from being thrown out of these spaces, and they also need to fund the arts. They need to find spaces for people to throw late night electronic music parties as well as a way, because people often think of this, funding for the arts, support for the arts, places for artists to live and do their work as as something extra, something beyond the bread and butter issues. But I think we've seen through this event that this is a matter of life and death. We need safe spaces to be able to come into the light and to stop treating artists like criminals. any kind of artist, people who are, whether you're throwing a dance party or, or organizing a work-live space.
Neha, we're going to have to leave. We have to leave it there, but I thank you so much for spending this time. Bay Area DJ, record label owner who survived the Ghost Ship Warehouse fire. 7 of Nehar's friends died in the Ghost Ship fire. And